Wiggity wiggity, what up, y'all? It's Ukrainian Limbs, and I moved to Brooklyn, New York when I came here from Ukraine in 1991. I lived in an area called Coney Island for some time, and there's this urban legend about a man who lived down the street from me, in fact. And this here is the story of a pimp named Felix. Felix was a DJ living off TV dinners. He would book a gig every now and then, maybe a bar mitzvah in Crown Heights or maybe a small club in Manhattan, but he lived from paycheck to paycheck. One time he got a call from an old friend, Chester. Chester needed some help. He had just moved to New York, and Chester's brother was getting married. They needed some help planning the wedding. Chester remembered Felix was a DJ back in the day, so he asked for his help. And, of course Felix was more than happy to get the gig, but, Chester also had one more small favor to ask of him. He had to plan a bachelor party for his brother, but he was on a budget, and he didn't want some disease-ridden skanks all up on his brother. Felix wasn't sure what to do, so, he said he'd ask around and see what the options were. The next day, Felix met up with his friend Patricia, who just found out that she had been fired from her job as the plastics remover at Taco Bell. She apparently wasn't doing a good enough job separating the edible and inedible meats at Taco Bell. On top of that, she was 2 months pregnant. She was damn near broke and didn't know what to do. Felix didn't know what to say, and, after an uncomfortable silence, he brought up the fact that, their old high school friend Chester needed help planning a wedding. He explained to her that he was going to be a DJ and asked if she knew of any good escort services. Patricia was astonished. He had the nerve to bring that up given the bad news she had just told him. But, after, thinking it over for a couple minutes, the two of them awkwardly came to a compromise. Patricia had studied dance in high school, and, with enough practice, she was confident that she could entertain a group of guys just this one time. So they agreed to have Patricia entertain at the bachelor party, and sure enough, when the time came, she did a fantastic job. She was so thankful that Felix referred her that she gave him $200. Felix looked down at the money and realized he barely made that for DJing the wedding. How did Patricia make that much at a bachelor party, he thought. Coincidentally, he got a call from Chester later that day, thanking him for DJing and setting up the bachelor party. They exchanged thank yous, made small talk, but soon Chester surprised Felix with another job offer. His good friend Demetrion Tangelo was hosting a New Year's bash and needed a DJ and a stripper. Felix was ecstatic and volunteered to be a DJ. But on the topic of a stripper, he felt awkward offering his friend Patricia again, and Chester sensed this. He told Felix, this party was going to be big. He'd pay him $2,000 to have Patricia dance there. And that's all he said. Felix was astonished. He'd never worked for that kind of money as a DJ, and he said he'd think about it. He went to meet with Patricia at the coffee shop the next day and, found her crying when he got there. She looked up and she had a huge bruise across her face. She explained that she had gone to try to strip at a private party the night before, and she didn't get paid for it. When she demanded her money, she got punched in the jaw and doesn't remember anything else. Felix felt terrible. He was the one to expose her to stripping in the first place, and he said he'll help her pay her rent until she can find a real job because, she'd just gotten laid off at Taco Bell. Unfortunately, Patricia had just been evicted and had nowhere to stay. Naturally, Felix offered his place for the time being, but, the both of them knew they needed work or neither of them would have anywhere to live in the near future. The next day, Chester called Felix and told him that the New Year's bash was a huge success and that, he would have more work for both him and Patricia, which was great. They were both done facing the ethical dilemma of being an escort. They knew they were desperate for the cash, and it turns out Chester and his brother owned a series of clubs and needed a dancer almost every night of the week. This was great news, and the two of them made a living off of it. One day, Patricia approached Felix with a dilemma. Patricia's friend Denise had just lost her job too, so Patricia told her that she could help her get work. Felix talked to Chester, and it turns out that they're always in need of more dancers. It was bringing in such great business for the clubs. So Felix hooked Patricia and Denise up with a party almost every night, and they made money, and they made money they could never even dreamed of before. So soon enough, Denise's friends saw the fancy things she was buying, and they wanted a piece too. Those friends told their friends, and those friends told more friends. Suddenly, Felix had 20 girls working for him. When it came to finding a stripper, everyone in Coney Island area knew to go to Felix. Felix took all the money he had saved up and bought himself a nice apartment on the east side of Brooklyn. One day, he ran into one of his neighbors and introduced himself. To his surprise, the neighbor knew who he was, and he said he was most impressed with the success of the up-and-coming Felix of Coney Island, and that he wished him all the best. Felix's cheeks glowed bright red, and he was most thankful, but as they parted ways, the other man made it quite clear that Felix was too young and ambitious, and he could never make it in the big leagues, for he was talking to Bruce, the biggest pimp in all of Brooklyn. This shook Felix. I mean, he had felt on top of the world, but after meeting Bruce, he realized he was really still a small tadpole in the pond of pimping. At that moment, he decided he would one day be more infamous than Bruce, and he would run the streets of Brooklyn. He started small. I mean, he told his girls that there was a private party that needed dancers, and that there would be an opportunity to make some supplementary income if you're willing to provide a few favors. The girls were very hesitant. I mean, remember, most of them had just recently started stripping, but one girl, Patricia, didn't hesitate to volunteer. She heard Coach was coming out with a new line of purses, and she needed the money badly. Within a week, she strutted around the corner wearing the finest accessories, and all the girls were in awe at her glamorous fashion. They too wanted to make some supplementary income and came to Felix asking to work some corners. Felix thought of the daunting words of Bruce, and he didn't hesitate to send those girls out on the corners. He knew they'd fetch a pretty penny. So the girls went to the streets and started selling themselves to the businessmen of New York. Felix saw riches he'd never even imagined, yet all he wanted was to prove to Bruce that he wasn't a small fry, that he could be great too someday. But soon enough, the hoes started trifling. They noticed that certain girls were making a lot more money than others, and Felix too realized that not all the corners were created equal, and he had to devise a fair orientation for these hoes. He created a schedule that rotated all the girls, so they spent equal time at all the hot spots and all the dead corners alike. The hoes stopped trifling, and the riches kept pouring in. New recruits would come, and he would show them the ropes, and after a month or so, he had a hoe on every corner of East Brooklyn. But something still wasn't right. Some of the hoes were consistently bringing in more cash than others, regardless of their corner. A girl like Trisha was making twice as much as Danielle on any given corner, so he called in the two girls and asked what was up. Danielle, why can't you make as much money as Trisha? Well, Danielle wanted to know just as much as Felix did, so they stared at Trisha, but she said nothing. He realized that the two girls would not talk, so he asked Danielle to step out of the room. Trisha explained to Felix that she was the freakiest biatch in all of Coney Island. She's willing to go above and beyond the call of duty just to make an extra bucks. But Danielle, she has standards. One guy at a time, no bareback, nothing too fancy, just good old-fashioned fornication. So of course Trisha was making more money. Felix dismissed the hoes and thought to himself, he better put the freakiest hoes on the most popular corners in order to maximize their potential. He heard about girls like Lolita Mamacita, who would do DVDA, Arabian goggles, rim jobs, just about anything. So he put her on 4th and Main, his best corner. He heard Caprice would do 6 guys at once, so he put her on 123rd and Rochester, another great corner. He divvied out the hose accordingly, and he knew he was well on his way to overtaking Bruce. But as usual, nothing went as expected. Suddenly, all the girls were bringing in surprisingly great, high amounts of money. Felix was thrilled, of course, but he had to figure out why. It turns out that the girls had found out Trisha was doing DVDA with guys and making a minimum of $700 an hour. They all started doing DVDA and brought in record profits. Yet over the next few weeks, the margin declined, and girls like Trisha were only bringing in half as much as they used to. He held another hoe conference and found that customers were simply not willing to pay as much. Knowing that they could get the same service from any hoe on any of Felix's corners, they could shop around. Naturally, girls like Trisha and Lolita Mamacita felt hosed. They had their moves stolen, and they were no longer seen as specialized hoes. Even girls like Patricia were upset, since she had been doing this for longer than any of the young bloods. Yet they were all getting the same attention from customers. Felix was dumbfounded. He wanted the right host to stand out, but what difference should it make whether he's peddled one particular pussy longer than another? Also, whenever a new hoe approached, he couldn't turn them away, because he knew that they could use the money, but they could just copy the experienced hoes. They're the ones that were inventing the best moves. So, Lolita had just invented the reach around double ground pound last week, but suddenly it's already the most popular move in all of Brooklyn. Felix couldn't take it anymore. What started as an easy way to help his best friend turned into one big network of bickering bitches. I mean, should it matter whether one hoe has been working the corner longer than another? How can a hoe get credit for making up a move when all the other hoes will just copy her? How can we naturally get the freaky hoes to stand out from all the copycats who probably don't even belong in the business when there are simply so many hoes clouding our vision? And that's a story of Call of Duty on YouTube.